The fracture of the left has become a chasm, and if we don't heal this divide in short order and align on certain fundamentals, we are dust in the wind. Now, I have receipts and some thoughts on how to get started. So let's begin. UNFTR. The unifying force of generational candidate Barack Obama failed to morph into a unified movement, partly because it was all promise and no platform. The failures of the Bush years were many: disastrous and costly wars abroad, financial cataclysm resulting in the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, the rapid loss of civil liberties under a new mass surveillance regime. Just some highlights to name a few. Now, Obama was the anti-Bush. He was smart, accomplished, youthful, and sincere. False bravado was replaced with genuine swagger. No more seat-of-the-pants Texas-style leadership, only cool, calculating policy precision. In retrospect, however, the Obama years represented a movement in a man, not a man at the head of a movement. We were so desperate to stop the bleeding from the Bush years that we were willing to check foundational leftist principles at the door. So when people like Cornel West and Chris Hedges criticized the obvious doubling down on neoliberalism and corporatist policies, many on the left were simply unable to listen to the critiques. I mean, we heard them, but not everyone was listening. And all the right had to do was play the role of loyal opposition and stonewall anything that looked or sounded promising to the masses. Now, during this time, the world was also becoming more attuned to online sources. So if you think back to that period, remember that 9/11 conspiracy documentary, Loose Change, came out toward the end of the Bush administration, and it introduced a generation of digital natives to conspiratorial information that wasn't being pondered in the mainstream media. Dark places developed online as conspiracies circulated in far left and far right circles, and the web became a free-for-all for shadow information that was largely uncredited and unvetted. Now, YouTube had just launched, and podcasts were soon to come as well. Over the next 15 years, the online pundit class exploded and matured to the point where the Joe Rogan podcast became one of the most widely consumed media sources in the United States, and some YouTubers have larger monthly viewership than some cable news networks. Today, the right is more than just Fox News. The online space is dominated by several notable figures with enormous financial backing: PragerU, The Daily Wire, Turning Points USA, and the constellation of influencers such as Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk, Dennis Prager, Steven Crowder, Matt Walsh, and yes, Joe Rogan have enormous footholds in the public consciousness. Now, it's not that the left doesn't have comparable numbers on places like YouTube. It's just that the right has superpowers of message amplification that the left has yet to figure out. Here's what I mean. When the right takes on an issue, it goes all in with complete solidarity. Disputes arise around contracts and egos, such as the Candace Owens splitting from Ben Shapiro or everyone abandoning Steven Crowder. But when it comes to messaging, they are incredibly disciplined. There are very clear funding sources to many of their enterprises that also keep them focused on specific issues, and we've unearthed these before. These backers are huge, like the Wilkes brothers, who poured millions of dollars into building the Daily Wire and PragerU. Then there's the platform aspect to consolidate and circulate information, such as Rumble and Parler, Truth Social, and now X. And the mainstream cable outlets do play their part by cross-promoting certain individuals and ideas. You see, it's less about the size and number of the platforms and more about their organization and message discipline. Every nail gets hammered in the same way, at the same time, and in the same place. Immigrants, bam, bam. Trans people, bam, bam. Markets are good, government is bad, bam, bam. The right is playing 3-chord country music in 4/4 with familiar hooks, and the left is playing blue rondo a la Turk in 9/8. Gone are the days of Gore Vidal versus William F. Buckley. Now, it's billionaire-funded think tanks generating ideas and promoting them seamlessly through right-wing mouthpieces on multiple platforms against a left spectrum that ranges from platform Marxists to well-intentioned corporate Democrats. To be clear, I'm talking about platformed voices on the left. There are public voices and thought leaders on the left that are out there, from Cornel West and Tavis Smiley to Noura Erakat and Rashid Khalidi to Yanis Varoufakis and Naomi Klein. I'm not talking about the left intellectuals. Let me name check a few to illustrate my point. You've got David Pakman, FD Signifier, David Dole, Ben Burgess, Brianna Joy Gray, Owen Jones, Mehdi Hassan, David Sirota, Paris Marks, Hassan Piker, Brian Tyler Cohn, Sam Cedar and Emma Vigland, Mark Lamont Hill, Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian, Kyle Kalinsky and Crystal Ball, Abby Martin, Tom Hartman, Francesca Fiorentini, Lance of the Surfs, Zoe Baker, Mike Figueredo, Zach and Gavin from the Vanguard, or Silly and Billy as TYT likes to call them, and we'll talk about that in a minute, Amy Goodman, Danny Bessner and Derek Davison, our guys over at the American Prestige podcast, Brad Onishi, Nick Hanauer, Laura Flanders, Ryan Grimm, Ole Olerin, Jeremy Scahill, Juan Gonzalez, Brad Friedman, Lee Camp, Katie Halper, Ben Meislis, Hal Sparks, John Fugelsang, Stephanie Miller, Chris Hedges, Matt Binder, Jared Yates Sexton, Matt Leck, Nathan Robinson, Benjamin Dixon, Jordan Sheridan, Josiah from Pondering Politics, Leisha Miller, Destiny, the Chapel Trap House crew, Trey Crowder, Cody Johnston, some guy named John Stewart, John Iadarola, and Richard Wolf, just to name some folks that are in my personal headspace, so you know that there's a ton more out there. Point being, no one's pulling the strings on this side. Now, I'll argue that there was some semblance of effort in this election to align messaging around Kamala Harris. There are a few names on the list that checked their leftist bona fides at the door, swallowed hard, and got on message with the establishment, and you know who you are. I didn't even bother putting the Pod Save My Place in Society fellas on this list, for example. Now, this doesn't even get into the politics-adjacent conversations happening on other popular online platforms. For example, I would bet that young people are tuning into Theo Von, The Brilliant Idiots, or The Breakfast Club during peak political moments. The audience capture on these mediums is enormously influential, even if they only crack the surface of wider discussions. Infotainment is just as influential these days as pure political punditry, even if we don't realize the impact that it's having on the culture. But back to the left. The larger point about conversations happening in left spaces is that they're as diverse as the hosts themselves. Like I said, with the exception of some transparently deliberate efforts on behalf of some of these figures to carry water for the DNC during the election cycle, there are some thoughtful and productive conversations happening all around us all the time. And therein lies both the beauty of the left and the inherent problem. But here's the thing. There's nothing new about it. Now, have we lost some erudition and meaning along the way? I think so. I mean, go back and watch James Baldwin pummel William F. Buckley at Cambridge University to get a sense of what we've lost in the discourse. Now, on the flip side, the discussions are more abundant and accessible these days. You see, I don't think political discourse should be the exclusive purview of elite thinkers. The barroom philosopher, king or queen, has a great deal to offer to the conversation from a place of reality and lived experience. But the explosion of thought, nuance, and tribalism on the left has also led to infighting. Again, nothing new, but there are certain gaps that need to be closed if we're to mount a counteroffensive to right-wing narratives that have taken hold in our society. In many ways, the aftermath of the election has surfaced our disagreements in petty ways that are kind of fun to watch, and I'm guilty of it myself. So take the Young Turks, for example. Right now, the online left is ablaze over what appears to be a deliberate turn to the right by the leaders of TYT. So I mentioned Zach and Gavin before from the Vanguard, who have been hammering away at TYT and comparing their new approach to previously pretty well documented right turns by figures like Dave Rubin and Jimmy Dore, both of whom, by the way, were part of the TYT network in the beginning. The fact of the matter is that the online left owes a great deal to TYT for establishing the online left in the early days of YouTube in particular. It led to a cottage industry of pundits like Emma Vigland, Francesca Fiorentini, and John Iadarola, who are now prominent figures on the left. But the two main faces of TYT, Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian, have made a discernible shift in their approach to appeal to right-wing audiences by appearing on shows like Tim Pool, Charlie Kirk, and Glenn Beck. Now, these appearances are being made under the auspices of an olive branch, an attempt to find common ground. But that's not really how it works in these spaces, and several online leftists are having none of it, accusing Cenk and Anna of trying to cozy up to the moneyed sources behind many of the right-wing shows. So to be real about it, the financial success of people like Rubin, Dore, and Poole is undeniable. And the idea that Cenk and Anna are somehow going to infuse leftist values into their hate-mongering venues is misguided at best. So the only image I have in my head is of Cenk and Anna dining with Ferris Wilks like Cypher enjoying a steak with Agent Smith in The Matrix. And watching Zach and Gavin get under their skin is somewhat of a guilty pleasure to me right now, so I won't deny the appeal of this moment. But my greater hope is that we exit this post-election blame game phase and get down to business sooner than later. The task at hand is to find common ground on the left, not the right. In the not-so-distant past, the left in the United States flirted with something resembling cohesion. The Bernie Sanders movement of 2016 and 2020, which briefly united progressives, socialists, and disenchanted liberals under a banner of economic justice, healthcare reform, and systemic change. But as Sanders' momentum waned, so too did the tenuous alliance of factions within the left. What remains now is a splintered spectrum of ideologies from establishment liberals clinging to the framework of the New Deal to radical leftists advocating for an overhaul of capitalism itself. The fractures are deep, and the online left has devolved into circular firing squads over issues ranging from Israel-Palestine to labor, identity politics, immigration, and the role of the state. But these divisions, like I said, are nothing new. So this might seem like a stretch, but in fact, these disagreements bear resemblance to the debates that plagued the First and Second Internationals of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Figures like Karl Marx, Mikhail Bakunin, Leon Trotsky, and Karl Kautsky all grappled with questions of ideology, strategy, and praxis. And just like then, these divisions threatened to undermine the collective power of the left at a time when unity is desperately needed. Perhaps by examining the past, we can illuminate a path forward for today's fractured left. So digging back into history, during the First International from 1864 to 76, Marx and Bakunin famously clashed over the role of the state in achieving socialism. So you had Marx's camp, which argued for using the state as a tool to transition to communism, while Bakunin's anarchists warned that any state power, even in socialist hands, would inevitably lead to tyranny. And this schism ultimately led to the International's dissolution. The Second International in 1889 to 1916 saw its own fractures, especially over the question of reform versus revolution. So you had figures like Karl Kautsky, who advocated for a gradual parliamentary path to socialism, while Rosa Luxemburg and Lenin criticized this as opportunistic and insufficiently radical. The outbreak of World War I further splintered the movement as nationalistic tendencies overrode internationalist solidarity. So the takeaway here? The divisions weren't just ideological. They were about strategy, power, and the practicalities of organizing diverse factions. The Internationals ultimately failed to maintain unity because they lacked a framework for reconciling these differences. So if we think about our current situation in this historical context, there's a lot to learn. But it also shows just how far we've strayed from having these important discussions. See, if the left is to rebuild its alliance, we have to acknowledge our legitimate differences and occupy forums where we can grapple with them to produce frameworks to move forward. Agree to disagree on some aspects, but align on central themes. So think coalitions rather than parties. And thinking in these terms allows us to disagree in online spaces, but align on fundamental issues that turn from agreements into alliances when it matters politically. There's a time to be ideological, and there's a time to be transactional. The problem we face is that the left hasn't aligned on the transactional elements that make us an immovable bloc during elections or really important legislative periods. So just because we have a two-party system doesn't mean that we can't move in parliamentary circles. So I bring up the First and Second Internationals not as a source of inspiration, but as a cautionary tale. Many of the most important issues they faced at the time were left unresolved at crucial moments of global transition in labor, revolution, and hyper-nationalism. And these are the parallels that I see in today's world. I mean, AI is set to revolutionize labor domestically and abroad. That's something we're going to unpack in great detail in the new year. But the upshot here is that the economic dislocation among the laboring masses will be like anything we've experienced in living history. Not only are we unprepared to meet this moment, we're not even talking about it in the right way. And then there's the looming reality of Project 2025 being implemented with blinding speed, which will lead to further social divisions and fan the flame of nationalism, again, in ways that we haven't experienced in nearly a century. So Bakunin was ultimately proven to be right in his assessment of the international movement. But was he right because of human nature or circumstances that got away from them due to incrementalism? It's a whole other discussion that might seem anachronistic, but I promise it strikes at the heart of the modern moment that we face. Okay, so what does such an alliance look like? That is the trillion-dollar question. And my contribution is simple. To quote the bear, we need to find our non-negotiables. Mind you, I'm speaking about the United States only here, and there are inherent flaws even in that construct, as any good Marxist will tell you. But I see it at a minimum as a starting point, and here's what it looks like. Number one, universal health care. It's one of the simplest fundamental rights that we can agree upon that also has a definitive and existing policy prescription. I mean, Medicare for all has to become the uniting principle on the left. The fact that the vast majority of the country is demonstrably in favor of it and that the Democratic Party didn't even speak to it is a travesty. Number two, labor. The right to be and feel productive and to also be fairly compensated. So what does this look like in practice, especially within a system that favors right-to-work union-busting behavior? It looks like a government-sponsored civilian corps, and we'll talk more about this concept in the new year, but it's nothing new. It's going to be more important than ever, however, if we consider what I think is going to happen to the workforce coming to fruition. Number three, climate justice. This one touches on nearly every aspect of decision-making. By centering climate in all of our think tank and policy discussions and carrying out ideas to their logical climate impact solution, we can more carefully guide a future that mitigates the impact of climate change. Number four, shelter. Now, there's been a great deal of work on welfare and poverty alleviation issues that show that social service interventions and assistance are anywhere from impossible to moderately effective, but rarely, if ever, complete if people are unhoused. The Housing First initiative is one that we can all agree upon, especially when you consider the sheer number of unhoused children that live in the wealthiest nation on the planet. It is truly unconscionable. And lastly, number five, speech. Money cannot be protected as speech. I mean, the range of issues that stem from this fundamental concept is staggering. For every project that we have on the left, it's easy to draw a straight line to the wallets of the billionaire class stopping it. If we don't eliminate Citizens United and reform campaign financing, few of our issues will ever be resolved. The stakes are just too high for petty squabbles and purity tests. Whether the left can unify around shared principles or remain mired in division will determine its ability to challenge the systems of exploitation and oppression that define our age. And if we can't unfuck the left, then we might as well hand the keys to Bezos and Musk and let techno-feudalism run its course. Here endeth the lesson. Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I hope you liked the video and you subscribed to the channel. And if you've done all of those things, just share it with like 400,000 people that you know because it helps us get discovered. Now, for the uninitiated, you can go to UNFTR.com to find all of the things in the little UNFTR universe. So we've got an archive of essays and articles, progressive spotlights, a directory of progressive resources, and there you can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter. That's right, it's free. And once you're there, and once you're in and you're getting all the information and material delivered right to your inbox and you've got notifications coming to your phone, you will officially be part of the cult. I mean, family. Okay, that's it for today. We'll catch you in the next one.